When I was 16 years old, I was in a very low point in my life, and I ended up getting hospitalized for 4 months over the summer. The doctors were afraid that my heart would give out if I even did so much as to walk. So if I wanted to go anywhere, I had to call a nurse to take me in a wheelchair. My mom and dad visited me every day, but not always together. Whenever my mom came alone, she would take me out in a wheelchair to the beach access behind the hospital, so I could get some fresh air and look at the lake. One day my mom had come by to visit, and she took me out to the beach as usual. While we were waiting for the elevator down from the ward, a man stopped my mom and me.
"Your daughter has such beautiful black hair."
The way he said it gave me the willies, kind of in a Buffalo Bill-esque "I want to wear it" way. My mom thanked him and chatted a bit, but I just looked the other way and ignored him. I could feel his eyes on me though. We all pile into the elevator, and as soon as the doors close, I feel something tugging at my hair. I glance over and realize that the guy is playing with my hair. I'm pretty creeped out here, but I don't want to cause a scene just in case he has a mental disorder and can't help himself. So I just leaned over as far as I could in the wheelchair so that he couldn't reach me without alerting my mom. Anyway, we reach the bottom, get off, and my mom and I start wheeling over to the beach, while the guy just stands by the elevator and watches us go. I told my mom what he did, and she said she'd make sure to do something if we ever saw him again. After that, we kept seeing him, always by the elevator. He'd make a comment about how beautiful my hair is. My mom would nod politely, we'd go in the elevator, and he'd try to play with my hair. But my mom would move in the way. We'd get off, and he'd watch us roll out. Creepy, but we decided he was harmless. Until about a month later. We went down to the beach as usual, and this time we didn't see him at the elevator, but we didn't think much of it. At some point my mom had to use the restroom, and it was mutually decided I was old enough to take care of myself for 3 minutes. I was sitting in the wheelchair looking out at the lake and enjoying the sun, when I started getting pushed. Thinking it was my mom, I turned around to ask for 5 more minutes. Nope, not my mom. Nope, it's the fucking guy. He's pushing me towards the bushes, and the look on his face is predatory. I scream, but the only other people out there are in a canoe, out in the water. So I make a decision. I decide if I'm going to die, I'd rather it be heart failure than this dude. So I get up out of the wheelchair and start legging it towards the restrooms. I look behind me to see if he's following, and fortunately, he's not. He's just standing by the wheelchair looking shocked. I guess he thought I was paralyzed. I make it back to my mom, who'd run out of the toilet upon hearing me screaming. We both look back, and the guy is running away like he'd got a rocket in his ass. My mom carried me on her back to the wheelchair. Then we rushed to inform the hospital staff. They put a watch out, and for the next month there's security hanging around the elevator on my floor. But he never came back. So creep who preys on the sick and disabled, go fuck yourself, and I hope no one ever sees you again. So to give you a bit of backstory, a few years ago I started to suffer with a lot of stomach problems. Fast forward 4 years and it turns out I've got a stomach ulcer. Not ideal. Anyways, last summer I had to spend a night in the hospital, running some tests on it, and the main hospital isn't in my town, so my boyfriend offered to drive me up there. We got there quite late, probably around 9 p.m, and when I arrived, the nurse mentioned my boyfriend couldn't stay. I didn't like the idea of staying alone, mainly because I hate hospitals, so he offered to stay until they kicked him out. We fell asleep and got woken up at about 6 a.m. by one of the nurses, explaining that they had forgotten to ask my partner to leave, and even though she didn't mind, the head nurse would be on her way shortly to do her morning rounds, and I shouldn't have had a visitor in my room, so my boyfriend offered to go down to the car for a few hours to sleep more, and once they finished the tests, they would let me go. Anyways, this is where it got weird. About 5 minutes into him leaving, this random guy walks into my room and sits down, telling me the nurses asked him to come in here. I know it sounds stupid, but I guess I was in shock for a few minutes because I sort of believed him. Then I started probing him and his answer was the same. He was asked to sit in here. By now my fight or flight kicks in. Well, sort of, and I ran into the bathroom with my phone. Don't ask why I didn't run into the corridor. Again, I clearly don't cope well in these situations. So I get to the bathroom and call my boyfriend, who is crazy protective of me, and tell him what's happened. He immediately makes his way back from the car. At this point, from the bathroom, I can hear the guy shouting,
"What's this young girl's name? What age is she?"
I don't know who he's shouting to because no one is answering him. Thankfully, I can hear my boyfriend coming back into the room and asking the guy who he was. This must have startled him because he ran off down the hall. When I came out of the bathroom, I noticed my boyfriend had a horrified look on his face. What I should have also mentioned is that I wear contacts, but I had taken them out before falling asleep. So between not having full sight and in my panicked state, I'd missed that the man's hands, feet, and or clothes had blood on them because he had left a trail of blood across the floor, across the wall, and onto the chair he was sitting on. At this point, I went down the hall to the nurse's station, still a little shook up, and explained what happened. Right away, someone came up to clean the mess, but again they asked my boyfriend to leave, something he wasn't exactly happy about. The nurses were clearly trying to keep me calm as they tried to make light of it, but I knew something wasn't right, and at this stage, I've realized the guy is actually keeping a close eye on my room, because no sooner had my boyfriend left, the man walked back in, closed the door, and began walking towards me sitting on the bed. Thankfully, the nurse was present this time and demanded the man leave. I don't think they'd taken me too seriously until now, but finally they noticed that having a bloodied man continuously trying to break into my room was shaking me up, and they told me it was safer to have my boyfriend with me, as he must have been the guy's biggest deterrent. Rightly so, because for the rest of the morning, the guy kept walking past my room, trying to peer through, to see if my partner was still there. He eventually gave up or was sent somewhere else. I finished my tests and was allowed home. The nurses tried to tell me the guy had a head injury, which was the reason he was in the hospital, but they were obviously worried enough for my safety to let my boyfriend stay in the room. Anyways, what worries me the most is that the guy was definitely watching my room because every time my boyfriend left, he came in right away. It doesn't bear thinking about what would have happened if the nurses had kicked him out in the middle of the night. So random bloody guy in the hospital, I don't know what you wanted, but let's not meet. I figured I would share and see what you all thought of my hospital roommate. For a little background, when I was 15, I was put in short-term psychiatric inpatient at the hospital in my town. It was because I tried to kill myself, followed by a small breakdown in partial inpatient, which is basically inpatient, where you go home to sleep. After the breakdown in partial, they put me in full inpatient. It was during this time that my diagnosis was switched from depression to bipolar, and I haven't been back to inpatient since, but I was definitely very unstable at the time, so this all really freaked me out. The way the bedrooms were laid out, there would be 2 bedrooms with separate entrances connected to a small foyer with an open doorway to the main hall. No one was allowed into your private bedroom space except yourself, and only the 2 people in the bedrooms connected to it were allowed in their foyer. For my 3 days, I had a really nice roommate named Amber. Amber and I would sit in our foyer and talk, mostly about the things we were dealing with. On my 3rd day, Amber was sent home. I was bummed because as a result, I had no one who I could share space with. I spent my 3rd night alone. On the evening of my 4th day, a new girl came to Impatient named Jade. Being a girl, she was put in my room block rather than the other empty space where her roommate would have been a guy. The ward was co-ed, but the room blocks were gender specific. She was 14, a year younger than I was, and appeared to be Filipino in ethnicity. She had long dark hair that went halfway down her back and seemed very quiet. I was very polite to her, mainly since I was happy to not be alone in my block anymore. She didn't talk a whole lot for the first hour or so that she was there, but when we went to our block pre-bedtime, she explained to me why she was there. You see, the thing about her was that she seemed pretty normal up until she talked. The second she started talking, I felt immediately creeped out. It's not that what she was saying was all that weird, it was just how she talked. There was an edge to her voice that wasn't quite right and made her seem almost unresponsive to what she was saying. Her mannerisms seemed ever so slightly forced. She went on to basically tell me that she and her friends had gotten really drunk, and while running around doing drunk people things, she got caught and put in inpatient. That in and of itself didn't add up at all. You don't get put in inpatient for getting drunk with your friends, but a lot of people had bogus stories about how they had gotten in, so I just shrugged it off. She was very quiet most of the following day. That evening when TV time was about to start, Jade and I were sitting in the TV room with a 3rd girl from Inpatient named Ruby. You see, Ruby and I actually ended up friends in the outside world after coincidentally seeing each other again over a year after Inpatient. We ended up reminiscing about this incident with Jade, which Ruby also recalled. The 3 of us were alone in the room because the staff had walked out for a minute to talk to the desk person just outside of the room. She was within view but more than likely couldn't really hear the conversation. Ruby, Jade and I were all sitting on the couch. I was in the middle with Ruby to my right and Jade to my left. Ruby and I were talking about our cats on the outside. We were both missing our pets, and it was common for the teens and Impatient to talk about the things they loved the most on the outside. Jade wasn't in the conversation really, but suddenly piped up saying that she hated cats. She went on to tell a story about how a stray had once scratched her, so she killed it and chopped it up, then left the bits in the woods. If the story wasn't creepy enough on its own, I can recall how I described her demeanor. She said all of this as though she could have been ordering a cup of coffee or talking about the weather. It was horrifying. Ruby and I exchanged a look, and one of us, I don't recall which, asked about whether that was the first time she killed something. She responded that it wasn't, and that she kills small animals all the time, usually cats, because she hated them. Because that's absolutely a healthy and constructive way to deal with something you hate, right? Within the next minute, the staff person came back in the room. Ruby and I were still relatively floored by the incident. The staff was unaware of what had been said, and we didn't mention it. Fortunately, I left the hospital only 3 days later, and 2 of them were spent in a different room because an ant problem was discovered in my original room. I haven't seen Jade since, but I can't help but wonder if she is out there killing people or something. I like to pretend that she was just screwing with us in some sort of sick, demented way. At least she would just be a girl with a fucked up sense of humor rather than a psycho cat killer.